This is the invisible grief of a child whose parents separated. A child who learned to split themselves in two, one version for mom's house, another for dad's, always adapting, always adjusting, but never feeling whole anywhere. And here's the part most people don't see. That grief doesn't end when childhood does. It grows with you. It shapes your relationships, your career, your sense of worth. Because unless you understand what really happened, you'll carry those survival patterns into adulthood, the peacemaker, the pleaser, the one who never feels safe enough to just be. Roles that once kept you together, but now slowly pull you apart. It doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with silence. The silence of two people drifting apart while a child sits in the middle, pretending not to notice. You learn early that love can live in separate houses, but never under one roof. At your mother's, you shrink yourself small. You fold into her sadness, become her companion, her comfort, her reason to keep going. At your father's, you harden. You hide the tears, carry yourself like you're older, stronger, less needy than you really are. To homes, two languages, two versions of you, and the child becomes the translator, interpreting moods, managing silences, splitting themselves in half so no one has to carry too much. Freud would call this splitting a defense, the psyche dividing itself so it can survive unbearable conflict. Jung would call it the birth of the shadow, the exile of every piece of you that doesn't fit, the anger, the grief, the desperate wish for wholeness. But the world doesn't see any of that. To them, you look fine. Relatives praise you. Teachers admire you. You're so resilient. You're so mature. You're handling this so well. But no one asks at what cost. Because while you're busy being strong, a different story is unfolding inside. You're learning that love is fragile, that belonging is conditional, that safety is temporary. Birthdays carry an empty chair. Holidays are rehearsals, not celebrations. You smile for the photos, but inside you whisper, why wasn't I enough to keep them together? This is how a child disappears. Not physically, but psychologically. Your needs go underground. Your joy becomes muted. Your innocence is traded for vigilance. Psychologists call it hypervigilance. Always scanning the room. Always reading the air. Always prepared to shift, bend, disappear, if it means holding the fragile balance. And here's the cruel paradox. What once protected you, the pleasing, the adapting, the splitting, becomes the very thing that follows you into adulthood. Because patterns learned in childhood don't vanish with age. They echo. They show up in the way you love, in the way you work, in the way you see yourself in the mirror. You crave closeness, but intimacy feels dangerous. You long for stability, but chaos feels like home. You want to rest, but rest feels unsafe because, for you, safety always came with waiting for the next storm, and yet the world still applauds. You look independent. You look responsible. You look strong, but no one sees that your strength was built on loss, that your confidence hides a quiet fracture, that somewhere inside you, a child is still waiting for both parents to walk through the same door. Together, Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But how do you accept yourself when you were never allowed to exist whole? This is not weakness. This is survival. A child's biology choosing attachment over authenticity. A young heart dividing itself in two because carrying absence was too heavy. But here's the truth. The child who learned to split in two grows into an adult who aches to feel whole again. And that's where our story turns next. Because what happens to this child when they grow up? What happens when the masks that once saved them start to suffocate them? The child grows up. At least, that's what the world sees. But inside, the story is still unfolding. The patterns that once protected you now begin to imprison you. You enter adulthood carrying invisible luggage, suitcases filled with silence, with vigilance, with the ache of absence. On the outside, you look strong, independent, self-sufficient. You pride yourself on not needing anyone. But Freud would remind us, independence can be a mask, a defense against the terror of needing love, and watching it walk away. So you build walls, tall ones. No one can leave you if no one gets too close. And yet, in the same breath, you crave intimacy so deeply it hurts. Jung would say, this is the shadow at work. The hidden child still longing for warmth, while the adult self insists, I'm fine. I don't need anyone. But the body remembers. The heart remembers. The dreams at night betray you. Doors closing, voices fading, the sound of footsteps walking away. Love feels complicated. You want it desperately. But when someone reaches for you, you flinch. You question. You wait for the fracture, because your nervous system was wired for instability. And now, stability feels suspicious. Work becomes your refuge. Success, your new attachment. Achievement fills the gaps where love once lived. But no trophy can quiet the child inside, whispering, see me, choose me, stay with me. The world praises you. You're so capable. You're so driven. You've built so much on your own. And it's true. But what they don't see is that every victory carries an echo of loneliness. Here's the paradox. The very strategies that kept you alive as a child, pleasing, hiding, overachieving, now keep you from being truly alive as an adult. But there is another path. And this is where the story bends toward healing. Healing begins when you stop running from the shadow. When you turn toward the pieces of yourself you were forced to bury. The grief, the rage, the longing, the need. Jung believed that wholeness is found in integration, in bringing the shadow into the light, and allowing the fragmented self to reunite. It is not easy. To feel the grief you once avoided is to reopen an old wound. To admit you long for love is to risk disappointment. To soften is to risk being hurt. But healing asks for courage. Not the courage of perfection, but the courage to be seen, messy, flawed, human, whole. In therapy rooms, in honest relationships, in the quiet space where you finally let yourself feel, the child begins to surface. And for the first time, instead of silencing them, you listen. You whisper back, I see you. I hear you. You were never the reason they left. And slowly, the fracture softens. The walls begin to thin. Love, once terrifying, becomes possible again. Not perfect love, not fairy tale love, but real love, messy, imperfect, alive. Freud said the task of adulthood is to love and to work. But perhaps for those of us who grew up split in two, the real task is learning to belong to ourselves first. The journey is not about erasing the past. It's about weaving it into your story without letting it define you. It's about becoming the parent to yourself that you always needed. And when that happens, when you can hold the child and the adult, the shadow and the self, the grief and the love, you finally become whole. The silence that began your story no longer defines it, because now your voice carries through it, not as a fractured child, but as a healed adult, one who knows that even when love lives in separate houses, wholeness can still live inside you.